Well, howdy friends, Brian Flechsig of Mad River Outfitters in the Midwest Fly Fishing Schools, and welcome back to another one of our fly tying tutorials. A couple weeks ago or thereabouts, I told you about the exciting new book from Blane Chocklett called Game Changer. Kind of reintroduced me to his silly skin products, and I've been playing around with them a lot, and I came up with what I believe is going to be my ticket out of here. I'm telling you, when this thing takes off, you will find me on the beach in Bermuda tying realistic cranefly larvae. The cranefly larva is, I've always said, it's the unsung hero of trout fishing, and we even use them for smallmouth around here. But it's a big, fat, ugly diptera that just really gets no love. They're so ugly, they're so grubby, and they'll never be on the cover of Fly Fisherman magazine. But trout, and in fact big trout, love to eat cranefly larvae. And I've always messed around with trying to come up with the perfect pattern, and I think, thanks to Blane and Silly Skin, I think I've finally done it. I haven't even named this fly. I'm just so excited to show you how to tie this thing, and I hope I can do a good job. But anyway, I'm sure that this is the most realistic cranefly larva ever created in the history of craneflies. So let's get started. It's really pretty simple to tie. And first off, I'm using a Daiichi 2220 size 4 streamer hook. Any old 4X streamer hook will work. You could even use a curved shank hook. I don't think it's all that important, but having a long shank 4X streamer hook to me is important. And first things first, get my eyeballs in place, and I'll go ahead and start the thread. And I'll start just behind the eye and just kind of wrap a base of thread all down the hook shank as I normally do on most flies. And then I am going to weight this fly. I'm going to weight it with 0.035 lead wire, and I guess you can put as much or as little as you want on here. Cranefly larvae are almost always going to be found bouncing along the bottom. I like heavy nymphs, and I want this thing to get down quick, so I'm gonna weight it pretty heavily. I figure I'm going with about 2.5, maybe close to 3 inches of the 0.035 lead. Actually, this is lead-free wire. So this is a environmentally conscious fly here. So starting your lead wire, what I do is just start right in the middle of the hook shank, and I wrap one end of it and just spiral it forward, keeping those wraps tight, although it's not critical. And then I'll use my thumbnail to kind of push that last little piece down right up tight against the hook shank. And then I'll come the opposite direction, wrapping towards myself with the remainder of that lead wire. I'll do the same thing with my thumbnail or my index finger there, and just kind of push it down against the hook shank. Now I'm going to come in with my thread, and I'm not even sure that this is overly necessary, but I like to build up a little ramp behind it and a little ramp in front of it. And what that does is it prevents that cliff. So as you're wrapping materials over top, you don't get this big disparity in skinny versus all of a sudden fat because of the lead wire. There's just that little bit of taper that prevents you from having that just big, huge difference. And then I'll spiral the thread right through it. And then I'll wind up with my thread eventually back at the bend of the hook. Right there. I always, and again, it's probably not necessary, but I always like to put a little bit of Zap-A-Gap or super glue. This is the Loctite stuff, which I've kind of gone to using this Loctite because I love this bottle. You just kind of squeeze the sides a little bit. I like the cap system. I've been using the Loctite a little bit more, I think, than I have Zap-A-Gap. I'll just kind of run my thread through there again. And like I said, it's probably not an absolutely necessary step, but I've always felt that securing the lead wraps in there with a little bit of super glue may prevent that lead from eventually twisting or wrapping around the hook shank. So first thing tied in, last thing wrapped. That's one of the rules of fly tying. And I'm going to use medium silver wire. And again, also notice for cutting the lead wire or lead-free wire and also cutting this silver wire, I'm using the Dr. Slick synthetic scissors. I use these things constantly. I use them for cutting almost all my big stuff, wires, leads, heavy stuff. The Dr. Slick synthetic scissors, they're just wildly durable and saves my good scissors from getting all beat up with the wires and things like that. So I'm just going to lash this to the hook shank. Again, starting at the bend of the hook, lash it down to where it's not going to go anywhere, and wind up with your thread back at the bend of the hook and keep that out of the way. Now, I went with a pretty long piece. This is probably longer than I need, but in the first few times that I tied this fly, I didn't have enough, and I ran out as I got up towards the head of the fly. So I'd say that's probably about 6 or 7 inches, somewhere like that. So just make sure that you have enough to rib this fly. This is going to be the final ribbing that goes over top of the silly skin. And then the next thing I'm going to tie in is a bit of olive vernal, or it's also called ultra chenille. I think it's the same stuff, but I'm going to tie this in, and I'm going to go ahead and lay it along the entire shank length. And I'm just going to lash it down. Doesn't have to be pretty. You're just trying to keep it in place. And I went ahead and covered the entire hook shank because what I'm trying to do here is build up quite a bit of bulk, because I want this to be a big, meaty, juicy crane fly larva. And so I want to build up some bulk underneath. My next material is going to be gray, medium diameter, standard rayon chenille. And forgive my little slinky of wire here. That is really bad form, but it's all I've got. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to lay this the entire length of the hook shank and just simply lash it down. Again, this is all going to be wrapped over, so it doesn't have to be pretty, just so that it stays in place. Okay? And now I can bring my thread forward to just a little bit behind the eye. But one of the things that I learned pretty quickly, we're going to put silly skin over this whole thing, which is really what makes this fly look so doggone edible. And I had found that on my first few, I crowded the eye, which is a common occurrence with a lot of flies, especially when you're trying something new. So go ahead and keep your thread quite a ways back from the eye. I'm going to say almost about 1/4 of an inch or so behind the eye of the fly, which gives ourselves plenty of room to tie off these 3 materials and the silly skin and give ourselves that little bit of dark head. And we're also going to want a little bit of a kind of a dark rear end to this fly, which if you look at a real crane fly, the ends of them are a little bit darker than the body. So that's it for kind of the prep work. And then I'm going to take this gray chenille and I'm going to go ahead and wrap, of course, always wrapping away from myself. And I'm going to wrap the meat of the body here. And I'm trying to place the chenille such that I get a nice kind of taper. It'll be a little skinnier on the ends, a little fatter in the middle, just like a crane fly. And then again, being sure that you don't crowd the head too much. go ahead and tie that off. I'll go 3 turns of thread over top of that chenille, and then I should be able to come in with my synthetic scissors and trim that off. Now, I'm going to take the vernille or ultra chenille, and I'm just going to kind of rib this fly, so to speak. It doesn't have to be exactly perfect. I'll try to kind of come in between the wraps of chenille here. You do want this to be, I think the sign of a well-tied fly is nice, evenly spaced ribs. You don't want them all crooked and cockeyed and such. And I almost didn't use enough of this ultra chenille, but worked out perfect. Again, leave yourself plenty of room up behind the eye. 3 or 4 wraps on that, and then I trim the excess there, again, with my synthetic scissors. Okay, now, here comes the really cool part, utilizing this silly skin. I'm now going to go ahead and throw half hitches right here up behind the eye. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. For those of you that have tied flies with me before, you know that I don't even hardly know how to use one of these fancy tools called a whip finisher. I typically just use a half hitch tool, such as that one right there. That's not going to fit over the eye. So I just do it with my fingers. It's just as easy, just as quick. I don't have to reach up and grab a tool. I will throw a couple of half hitches here with my fingers, and all I'm trying to do, this is all going to get glued over and silly skinned over, so I'm just trying to make sure that that doesn't come unraveled, and my ultra chenille and chenille doesn't come unwound. Okay, we're now going to take the silly skin, and one thing about working with the silly skin is when you cut it, it's good to have a really good sharp pair of scissors to cut it. These are a little bit too big. I don't get the great cut. And then my titanium scissors are now about 18 years old. They're starting to get a little decrepit. And these loon scissors are just razor sharp. And these are much newer. So I found that having a pair of those is helpful. And I'm going to measure this, and I want to cut a piece, okay? And you'll see once we do this, but I want to cut a piece that's quite a bit longer, maybe about 1/8 of an inch longer on the rear end of the fly, and maybe about 1/8 of an inch or 1/16 of an inch or so on the front of the fly. And I just cut that piece out. And then what we're going to do is fold this. We're going to eventually just fold it up and over, okay, the top of the fly as such. And actually, I think what we're going to do is we're going to come down. We're going to fold it over the top of the fly. I was thinking about the fly pollas that I've been doing like crazy. We're going to fold this down. But regardless, you just want to give yourself enough. And I would say this is about maybe 1.5 inches, 1.75 inches, and again, just slightly longer. In fact, I'm going to trim that up just a pinch. So I've got a little bit of overlap in the back, and I've got a little bit of overlap in the front. Now, one of the tricks is that when you go to use this rib, it's going to go over top of the silly skin. And what I found is that when the first couple of these I tied, when I went to wrap this over top, it all kind of bunched up the silly skin at the back. So here's the trick that I kind of came up with. It's just come in right in the middle of it and just cut a nice little slit, maybe about just shy of 1/2 inch or so. I just cut a little bit of slit right in the middle of that silly skin. Now what you're going to do is just slide that right on top, and boom, this wire slides right up into that slit. And now when I fold this over, Now when I start wrapping, it's going to be in a perfect position. It's not going to look funny, it's going to look uniform, and it's not going to bunch up this silly skin and cause you a problem there. The cool thing about silly skin, I'm sure you've read about it in Blane's new book, or you've heard about it, it is self-healing. So having that slit back there, I can just kind of use the heat from my fingers to kind of hold it in place eventually, and it'll self-heal, and you won't even know that that slit was there, so no big deal. At this point, we want to go ahead and start our thread again. We tied it off at the front and finished it. We want to go ahead and start our thread again at the rear end of the hook, okay? We're going to have to tie off the silly skin, and this also gives the impression of that kind of dark rear end and the dark head that a crane fly larva has. Okay, here comes the hardest part of this fly. And we're just a couple of weeks away from tying flies with Blane Chocklett himself. I can't wait, and hopefully he can show me a better way to take the backing off of this stuff. But I've actually been leaving the fingernail on my middle finger here a little bit long so that I can reach in and pull the backing off. Now, silly skin is super stretchy, so you got to be very, very careful when you're pulling the backing off, okay? Don't rip it off, don't do it too fast, or it's going to attach to itself, and it's kind of hard to get it undone sometimes. So there we go, nice and gently, pull the silly skin off of the backing. And now you're going to take that silly skin, which you've removed the backing off, you're going to slide that wire right up into that slit. Okay, and now I'm just going to fold this over, kind of pull it tight, making sure you don't have any air bubbles in there, and then I'll just kind of seal it on the underside and stick it together. Okay, now I'm going to pull my thread out of there so I don't cut my thread when I go to trim this. Okay, and I kind of just play around with it, mold it into position. I'm making sure to focus on that little slit that I made to allow this wire to be wrapped properly. And then you'll see I've got this nice looking gummy body. I'm going to keep my thread out of the way and hopefully I don't cut it. And then what you're going to do is come in with those nice sharp scissors and come on the underside, and I trim it just shy of flush with the body. Okay, if you trim it too close, you wind up having gaps in that, and there I went and cut my thread. Of course, that can happen. But the cool thing is it's really easy to go ahead and restart that thread. And I'm just kind of playing with this silly skin, just kind of pushing it into place. And no problem, I can restart my thread right back here on the back of the hook. Right over top of the silly skin. And this is going to kind of secure that into place. And again, give you that kind of dark rear end, just like a real crane fly has. Okay, I've got that restarted. Come in with my titanium scissors. And now, the silly skin, you can kind of just pull it right off here on the back side. Just pull it right off. There we go. Got it pretty flush. And now I can kind of finish those wraps, wrapping over top of that silly skin. And it's kind of a pain having this in the way, but if I had this back here on my material clip, then I would be wrapping over top of it, and you don't want to do that, okay? So kind of a pain, and now I'm going to have to finish this. And again, I'll do that with my fingers. Just kind of fold this out of the way and come over top of that. Just go once, twice, and I'm not too worried about this again because we're going to coat it with some bone dry cement. And as long as you feel that it's secure, I put 2 half hitches on there and I'll just trim that. Okay, get that out of my way, and now I'm going to come up to the head of the fly and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to restart my thread and I'm going to wrap over top of the silly skin. And if you've got your measurement pretty right, you shouldn't have to trim anything or pull any of the excess off. Just make sure that you get these wraps such that you're not crowding that eye too much. And there we go. And I'll trim that excess, or trim the thread, excuse me. Okay, 2 more steps. I'm going to take the silver wire and I'm going to start to rib this fly. And I can kind of see the olive micro chenille. Then there is a rib, and I'll kind of follow along on the edges of that. And again, trying to get this proportionately correct as much as possible. And let's see, I'll throw 1 more in there and then hold it in position, throw my thread over with my left hand. And I'll give this 3 or 4 wraps. I'm going to come in with my synthetic scissors and I'll go ahead and finish this fly. Just kind of trying to clean up the head a little bit, making sure that the wire doesn't come undone. And again, doing my best to make sure that I don't crowd that head. In fact, I'm going to push it back out of the way a little bit. Okay, and now I'm just going to throw a couple of half hitches using my fingers. I'll throw another one just to be safe. Get a little bit of junk in there. I'll clean that out. Just kind of move it into position, and there you have it. I mean, to be honest with you, that would probably fish okay, but it's a little sticky, a little bit gummy. So the finishing touch, I played around with several different UV resins, but the one I decided on is the Bone Dry, which is by Solaris or Solares. And it's really pretty easy to work with. The Bone Dry is super thin. It doesn't create a really thick finish. And it comes in this handy little bottle with the brush. And I can just brush it right on. Okay, so you get a nice thin candy coating on top of this bug, and then hit it with your UV light. And this Bone Dry stuff is really great. I've been using it a lot more and more. And it doesn't take long to cure. It's nice and thin, perfect for applications like this. And as the name implies, it dries bone dry. So just a little bit with your UV light, maybe a little bit more. That's maybe the worst UV light I've ever seen. Is there actually any light coming out? So there you go, just even under a minute or so with your UV light, and bada book, bada bing. You've got what I think is truly one of the most realistic crane fly larva imitations I've ever seen. I'm just, so I don't even know what we're going to call it. We might not call it anything. We might just call it a realistic crane fly larva. Maybe we'll even call it the BC crane fly larva, because thanks to Blane Chocklett, getting me all excited about tying flies and reminding me how cool this silly skin stuff is for making flies with. In fact, that's what we'll do. We'll call this the BC crane fly larva. That's the official name. There you have it. You saw it here on live or previously recorded television, YouTube, whatever this is. Okay, friends, really simple. Some chenille, some ultra chenille, 4X long streamer hook, Blane Chocklett silly skin in sea foam green, and you will notice the color. And man, when you look at the intricacies of the hues that are hidden on the underside of this fly, I mean, it's just, if I don't say so myself, this is the perfect, most realistic crane fly larva I think you'll ever come across. If you wanted to, you could probably put a bead head on there, although I don't know why you would, and that would make it kind of tough to finish off that silly skin. So never mind that. Don't put a bead head on there. Just use your lead wire or lead-free wire if you're that kind of person, and off you go. So there you have it, friends. My greatest contribution to fly tying at this point. Like I said, this is my ticket out of here. I'm headed to Aruba or someplace tropical where I can just lay on the beach and rake in the profits from the BC crane fly larva. So tie it, fish it, let me know how it goes. Thanks for watching. As always, be sure to subscribe. Winter 2020-21 is on its way, and we're going to be tying a lot of flies this winter, so stay tuned. We've got a lot coming at you. Be sure to like this video. It makes me feel good. And as always, please stay tuned. We've got a lot coming at you. If you like this video, hit subscribe. It helps out a lot. And check out these videos. We think you might like them too.
Now and then it feels we're running on a Saturday.